Now, you might have your bulletin and you might be looking. We're going to start in Genesis chapter 37 this morning, and we're going to finish the book of Genesis this morning, which goes to chapter 50. And you might be thinking, Ozzy, are we going to have a break between the beginning of this sermon and halftime this afternoon? Well, no, of course not. No, of course, we're not going to deal with every verse and so forth. We're just going to get into this. How many of you, if you look, you see I actually titled this Joseph. How many of you have been told that this section of Genesis is the Joseph section? Maybe you wrote that down in your notes or something. I actually disagree with the idea that that could be the Joseph section. And the only reason I disagree with that is because Genesis chapter 37, verse 2, in the NASB, New American Standard, you'll see these are the records of the generations of Jacob. These are the Toledot, is the Hebrew word there. This is the story of the sons of Jacob. Let's look really quick at what how the NIV translated. This is the account of Jacob. Other translations will emphasize that this is the story, this is the beginning of the story about Israel's children. And you'll notice, if you've read this, that certain chapters, like in fact the next chapter, Joseph's not even in that chapter. And in fact, some of the chapters, he's barely in it. And that's because I don't believe that Joseph is the main character. I believe he's a main character of this section. But we have other sons of Israel who get speaking parts, if this was a stage production. And they get lengthy speaking parts. And I think that what we're not supposed to see is just Joseph. I think we're supposed to see a lot of what's going on in this, the family of promise, and what God is going to do and how God is going to do it. Can I ask you a personal question? Who here is willing to admit, I know everybody has, but who's willing to admit that you've watched one of those reality television shows? You have. Just admit it. The thing I like, or the thing that they want you to like about it, is they want to have this reality show. They want to have this moment in the show, this drama moment where this character is fighting with this character and so forth. And then, as the fight's progressing, they usually stop for a second, and you get this one shot of one of the two people talking to us, the audience, right? And they tell us that when so-and-so came in and started da-da-da-da-da, I was just livid. I just went at them and I da-da-da. And then we go to the other person, right, in that one shot, and they then get to tell us their side of the story. So-and-so actually started it. They had, right, you've seen this, right? That's why reality TV show sells, right? Because it creates drama and it gets you to tune in for the drama, right? I wish that reality TV existed back when Moses was writing the Bible, this section of the Bible, because I would absolutely love it. We read a bit of a narrative, and then we get Joseph, or we get one of the other brothers to talk directly to us and to tell us some of the backstory, some of the things going on here that we otherwise have to speculate. Staying in that verse, chapter 37, verse 2, sentence C, here in the NASB, what's been happening is Joseph and his half-brothers, who, by the way, are all older than him, they've been shepherding. Sentence C, and Joseph brought back a bad report about them, the brothers, to their father. What does that mean, that he brought back a bad report about his father, or about his brothers? Does this mean that he was tattletaling? Or were they misbehaving and he's actually reporting something important to their father that he should, as a good son, do? We don't really know which it is. We would love to know that thing. What was the bad report? Why did he bring it? Those are some of the questions that we just don't know. Skipping to the next verse, verse 3. Now Jacob loved Joseph more than all of his other sons. I want to take a moment and I want to point something out to you, that just because something is in the Bible does not mean that that's what God sees as the ideal. Right now we're seeing Israel, we're seeing Jacob play favorites with his kids. Just because that's in the Bible doesn't mean that that's the way God wants you to raise kids. Okay? It's just so we understand. Now, one of the things that you might notice here in the Genesis account is certain things repeat themselves. We see that Jacob is playing favorites. Where did Jacob learn to do that? With mom and dad, huh? He was mom's favorite, but Esau was dad's favorite, huh? We're going to see a couple other callbacks to some things that we've seen before here. Staying in verse 3, because he was the son of his old age, he made him a varicolored tunic, or a coat of many colors, or some form of an ornate, nice coat that he gave to one son that he didn't give to other sons. And that's one of the things that you have to see here. Now, interestingly, here in a couple verses, Joseph is going to be looking for his brothers. They're going to move the flock. He's going to be walking. It's going to say that the brothers are able to see him in the distance. What do you think might be the thing that gave away that it's Joseph coming towards them? Maybe the coat of many colors. They're able to recognize the coat from a distance, and that's going to set off their plan to ambush him when he gets there. I'm going to ask you a question. How big is your God? How big is your God? I want you to see all of the moving parts here in this story. And what I mean by a moving part is anything that a character does that they could have done differently, okay? So Joseph has already brought a bad report about his brothers. He could have brought a good report about his brothers, right? He made the choice to tell on them, right? Israel could have treated his children the same, right? Not played favorites, but he chose to play favorites, didn't he? He could have not given Joseph this coat of many colors, yet he chose to give Joseph this coat of many colors. This coat that I tell you gives him away later in the story, the one that makes it so that the brothers can identify him. There are so many moving parts in this story, and I want to repeat my question to you. How big is your God? That being said, Joseph here in a moment, beginning here in verse 7, he's going to start telling the brothers about a dream that he has. And the interpretation of the dream is pretty obvious because the brothers pick it up right away. Your dream is telling us that you're going to rule over us. And then he has a second dream. And once again, that dream once again points to him being the center of attention in the family and the most important one. What was the motive behind Joseph telling his brothers this story? They already are upset with him because he's already told on them to dad, right? And they already see that dad is playing favorites, right? Joseph, is this a good idea or a bad idea to tell your brothers these dreams that point to you being the most important child? Just saying that several things, not one thing, has been leading up to his brother's decision that they're about to make. It's not one thing, it's several things that get them hating their brother, right? Now, the story progresses. He has to go find his brothers. They've moved the flock. They recognize him. When he gets there, they've already kind of decided that let's kill him. That escalated quickly, didn't it? I mean, that's a bit of a jump. Let's kill him. One of the brothers, though, says, let's not kill him, though. Let's throw him in the cistern. Let's throw him in the gully. Let's throw him in the gulch. That brother is Reuben. Why do you suppose maybe Reuben is the one to speak up at this point? Well, something has already happened. Reuben is already in the doghouse with Dad. Reuben slept with one of Dad's concubines, and his dad found out about it. Reuben is already on Jacob's bad list. Reuben's probably thinking to himself, if I'm able to rescue Joseph, the favorite, and I'm able to get him home, maybe that'll get me out of the doghouse with Dad, huh? Whatever the case may be, Reuben is able to convince them not to kill Joseph, and so why does everybody have a J name in this story? I'm gonna make that mistake, just so you know. And so instead, they throw him into the pit. They throw him into that, and then they see this traveling band of Ishmaelites, and Judah, of all people, gets the idea: let's sell him. Let's not leave him to die. Let's sell him. One, that way we make a little bit of money on him. And two, that way he's out of our hair. So they pull him up out of the pit and they sell him off, right? And interestingly, they've had to strip him of that coat of many colors, right? What do they do with that coat of many colors? They kill one of the flock, and they put some of the that dead goat's blood on the coat. And they send that back to Dad, saying, Dad, check this out. We found this. Is it your son's coat? Interestingly, we've already seen this, though, in the story before. Remember another animal having to die to deceive Dad? Back with, in fact, Jacob himself. They kill the goat, and he puts it on so that if he's touched, he'll look like his brother Esau. It's interesting how things come back to haunt you, don't they? Anyway, so the Midianites, the Ishmaelites, they take Joseph and they take him to Egypt and they sell him to Potiphar. Now, here's where I want to get into a little bit of speculation, but I want to keep our speculation grounded. I want to ask you, is it possible? Is it possible that as these Midianites, who now have Joseph in their possession, are traveling, could they have come to another city before they get to whatever city they arrive in? It's possible. I don't know the route they took. Is it possible that that other city could have had a slave market? It's possible. Is it possible that another person could have bought Joseph before we get to the end of this chapter? And the specific person, the specific Potiphar, verse 36, meanwhile, the Midianites sold him, Joseph, in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's official and the captain of his bodyguard. Is it possible, under any other set of circumstance, that Joseph could have been sold to another person? Potiphar could have been late to the slave auction that morning, and somebody else could have gotten to Joseph first. Is it simply possible? And again, I want you to see how many moving parts are in this story and ask you again, how big is your God? How big is your God? So here in the next chapter, Judah and Tamar. Judah, one of the sons of Israel, he's going to be immoral. Interestingly, in the next chapter after that, then, 39, Joseph's character is going to be the exact opposite of Judah's character. So where Judah is willing to be sexually immoral, Joseph is not willing to be sexually immoral. And I think that that's an important thing to see, and why these two stories are right next to each other. I want to draw your attention to a particular verse, chapter 39, verse 4. So Joseph found favor in his sight, that's Potiphar's sight, and he became his personal servant. And he made him the overseer over all of his house and put him in charge of everything he owned. We might be quick to think, well, that's what God is doing here, right? God is going to put Joseph in this position. God sees that Joseph has had a raw deal here, and he's going to be in this position. It's going to be a good position. Except that this very position is the position that allows Joseph to be in the house where Potiphar's wife is. In the house where Potiphar's wife, who likes Joseph, who's looking at him with evil intentions, right? This position puts Joseph in that place where Potiphar's wife is going to try to seduce him, is going to try to get him to break faith with God, right? I want to show you something interesting here. Verse 11. Now it happened one day that he, Joseph, went into the house to do work, and none of the men were inside. She, that's Potiphar's wife, caught him by his garments and said, "Lie with me." And he left, leaving his garments in her hand, and fled outside. That boy just cannot keep his clothes on, can he? First his brothers take his clothes, now she's taking his clothes, right? And when she sees that she's got his clothes, what does she do? She yells, "That Hebrew slave that you brought into this house, he tried to rape me." Now, let's just be honest here. Husband comes home. Is he going to believe wife or is he going to believe slave? He's going to believe wife because she's got the evidence that he was in the house. What's going to happen here? He's going to end up in prison. How big is your God? Is your God able to still be God when things aren't going good? Is your God big enough to still be God when you don't see how he's doing things, how he's working things out? Is that how big your God is? You know what happens here in the prison, but I want you to see something. Despite the fact that Joseph is able to interpret the dreams for the two guys, right? And one of them is restored to Pharaoh's side, right? And he says to him, "When you are restored, remember me. Because I'm in prison here and I didn't do anything wrong. I've been kidnapped and all I want is to go home." And when that guy gets restored, what does he do? He forgets about Joseph. He forgets about Joseph, and Joseph stays in the prison for 2 years. How big is your God? Is your God big enough to work on his timetable, or does your God have to be small enough to work on your timetable? Can I tell you a story? I once told God what to do. That didn't turn out too good for me. Look at all the moving parts going on in this story still to this day. Still to this point, all these little things are happening that are people's decisions. The wife chose to be attracted to Joseph. The wife chose to lie about Joseph. Here he is in the prison. He chooses to talk to these guys. Isn't it pretty standard when you're in a bad mood, you just stay in your own corner? You just don't talk to people. Do you ever have those days? I have those days. Those days, I just don't want to talk to anybody. But Joseph, he chooses to talk to these guys. And Joseph, giving glory to God, is able to interpret their dreams. And one day, a day that neither Joseph nor the cupbearer could have ever predicted, could have ever planned, one day Pharaoh has a dream, and then he has another dream, and he's troubled by those dreams, and he needs to understand what those dreams are. And it just so happens that cupbearer on that day remembers Joseph. On that day, he remembers Joseph, and he tells Pharaoh about this guy he met in prison who can interpret dreams. And Joseph comes out of prison, and Joseph is able, through the power of God, to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. And Pharaoh is so impressed by this young man that he makes him vice pharaoh of all of Egypt. What would have happened had that cupbearer gotten out of prison the day he did, told Pharaoh about that kid that's in prison? Pharaoh would have let him go that day, maybe, and he would have scurried back to the land of Canaan. And then 2 years later, when this dream happens, they're not going to be able to find him, are they? All of these things seem to be working together. All of these things seem to be working together for a purpose, for a reason, not for one purpose, not for one person's thoughts, not for one person's reasons, but for a bigger picture, right? For a bigger plan. Romans chapter 8, verse 28. God works all things together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purposes. Not God makes all things good as you walk through life, and don't worry, you're never going to stub your toe, and don't worry, you're never going to have a bad day, because God makes all things good. That's not what it says. It says God works all things together for good for his purposes, right? What happens here in a moment? Famine strikes the land of Canaan. Joseph has risen to prominence. Because of those dreams, he's able to store up all that food. All that food makes Egypt a powerhouse in the world stage. His brothers have to come from Canaan down to him. They bow down before him. He recognizes them. They don't recognize him. He remembers that dream where the brothers come and bow before him, right? Here's one of those other places that I would love reality TV to be what we have here. I would love to get Joseph telling us what he was thinking. We have to kind of read into the text. He's about to play some games with his brothers, right? He's about to take one of them hostage. He's about to send the other ones back. When they come back again, there's going to be the cup left in the sand or in the bag of grain, right? He's going to do all these things. I think that we could read, if we want to read Joseph as only a good guy, I think we could read the text only as Joseph being a good guy. If we want to read Joseph testing his brothers, asking his brothers, are you the same brothers today that you were when you sold me into slavery? I don't know. But once again, all of these things are happening for a purpose. All of these things are coming together for this moment. Chapter 45, Joseph reveals himself. Chapter 45, verse 7. Joseph says, God sent me before you to preserve a remnant on the earth, to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Joseph has that moment, that revelation right there. He's able to see all of his life, all of those little choices, all of those little decisions that led to this point, led to this place where he is able to rescue his brothers and his whole family and to keep them alive. And he sees in that God has orchestrated all of these things. God has brought all of these things about. Once again, how big is your God? How big is your God? All of Israel goes down and into Egypt. They're there in the land. And eventually, Father Jacob dies. And once Father Jacob is dead, the brothers are afraid. They're afraid that now that Dad's dead, little brother's going to get his revenge. Little brother's going to get his pound of flesh, right? Look at what Joseph says. This is amazing. Don't miss this. Chapter 50, verse 20. As for you, as for brothers, as for you, you meant evil against me. Is that what they did? Did they mean evil against their brother? Absolutely, they meant evil against their brother. Do not leave here this morning thinking that Ozzy told you to go take one of your siblings and sell them into slavery and just watch how God can bring this about for good. That's not the point of this story, right? What the brothers did was evil. From a humanly perspective, from our perspective here on planet Earth, both feet planted here, we look at what they did and we go, what you guys did was evil. Look at what Joseph says. But God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result to preserve many alive today. How big is your God? Is your God bigger than human evil? Humans throughout the centuries have plotted evil. Humans throughout the centuries, if there are centuries ahead of us, humans will plot evil. Is your God bigger than human evil? Because if your God is not bigger than human evil, I don't know if you have a good picture of the God of Israel. I don't know if you get how big God is. In fact, is the word big even big enough to describe how big God is? What you meant for evil, God meant for good. My God is able to be God over the bad times. He's able to be God over that famine that brought them here. He's able to be God over their evil intentions. He's able to be God in all things. One thing that I've neglected to point out to you, how I pointed out that certain things crop up again in the story of the patriarchs, of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, of Joseph. Oftentimes you see them go down to Egypt. Oftentimes they have to go to Egypt, but they come back from Egypt, right? Every time they come back from Egypt. But here, Israel has gone into Egypt, and the story's about to end. And the story's about to end with them still in Egypt. You've been watching movies, you've been watching television shows. You know that the best way to get you to tune back in next week, you know that the best way to get you to buy another movie ticket is to have a sequel bait in there, to leave things on a cliffhanger, to make you want to know what happens next in the story, right? The author of Genesis has done just that. He's left Israel in Egypt. And you should be thinking, how do they come out of Egypt? And that's what we're going to deal with in the coming weeks. With that, I'd like to invite the worship team to come back up. And I just want to repeat that question. If you think I've asked this question more than once, it's only because I'm trying to drive the point home. How big is your God? Have you encountered human evil? I doubt there's anybody here who hasn't encountered human evil. And I want to ask you, is your God bigger than any human evil that humans can bring against you? Because if your God is not bigger than human evil, I don't think you have a good grasp on the God of Israel. Has God put you in Egypt at this point in your story? Is your God big enough to bring you back from Egypt when it's His time to bring you back from Egypt? Because that's how big our God really is. And that's one of those things that I want you to keep seeing as we read through the Bible. That God is not limited. God's not limited by time. He's not limited by our perspective. He's not limited by humans. God has a plan. God's plan is big enough. God's plan is powerful enough. And God will bring about God's plan.